You know what they say about assumptions. They make an ass out of you and, well, in this case, they make an ass out of an entire galactic civilization that somehow convinced themselves they were the apex predators of the universe. Spoiler alert, they weren't. The Zephyrian Collective had ruled the known galaxy for approximately 12,000 standard cycles, give or take a few genocides. They were your typical galactic overlords, 8 feet tall, chitinous exoskeletons that could deflect most energy weapons, 4 arms that could bench press a small starship, and the kind of superiority complex that would make a trust fund kid blush. Oh, and they had this charming habit of enslaving or exterminating any species they encountered, depending on their mood and the phase of their home planet's 17 moons. Ambassador Kethvar stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Inevitable Conquest, because apparently the Zephyrians never heard of subtlety, and gazed out at the small blue-green world spinning lazily in the void. His compound eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, reflected the planet's surface with something approaching boredom. "Another primitive world," he rumbled to his aide, First Claw Mordax. "What do the initial scans indicate?" Mordax consulted his data tablet with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "Standard carbon-based life, Ambassador. Bipedal, soft-skinned mammals. No energy shields detected on their vessels. Primitive chemical propulsion, and their most advanced weapons appear to be thermonuclear devices." Kethvar's mandibles twitched in what passed for amusement among his species. "Thermonuclear? How delightfully primitive. Do they at least pose any military threat to our survey fleet?" "Negative, Ambassador. Our preliminary assessment indicates they couldn't damage our hull plating with their most powerful weapons. The species calls itself humanity, and they appear to be in the early stages of space exploration. A few orbital stations, some probes sent to nearby planets. Nothing that would trouble a Zephyrian cargo hauler, much less a battle fleet. Now here's where things get interesting. See, the Zephyrians had this little quirk. They were incredibly thorough when it came to galactic conquest, but they had the attention span of a caffeinated squirrel when it came to actually studying their targets. Sure, they'd run a few scans, check if the local species could hurt them. Spoiler, they usually couldn't. And then decide whether to enslave or exterminate based on whatever passed for Zephyrian wisdom that day. What they didn't do was dig deeper into the psychological profiles of their targets. Cultural analysis was for lesser species who couldn't just brute force their way through problems. Why study the enemy when you could just step on them? This oversight was about to bite them in their chitinous rear ends. Very well, Kethvar decided, turning away from the viewport with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly. Standard protocol. Establish orbital dominance, transmit the surrender ultimatum, and begin resource extraction once they inevitably capitulate. Have the construction ships prepare to begin harvesting their oceans for deuterium. The water will make excellent fuel for our next campaign. What about the native population, Ambassador? Kethvar paused, considering. Are they particularly intelligent? Do they show any technological promise that might prove useful? Difficult to say, sir. They do show some unusual behavioral patterns. Our psychological analysts are having trouble categorizing their responses to stress and conflict. Unusual how? Mordax hesitated, which was unusual for a Zephyrian officer trained from birth to show no weakness or uncertainty. Well, sir, most species we encounter respond to existential threats with either immediate submission or desperate, panicked resistance. These humans seem to escalate. Escalate! Yes, sir. When faced with a challenge, they don't appear to properly assess the odds against them. Instead, they tend to, how did the analyst put it? Double down on stupid. Kethvar's mandibles clicked dismissively. Irrelevant. Stupidity makes conquest easier. Proceed with the invasion protocol. Lieutenant Commander Alex Stone was having what his grandmother would have called one of those days, which was military speak for everything is going to hell and someone needs to fix it right now. He'd been in the middle of his morning briefing at Luna Station Alpha when the sensor array started screaming like a banshee with its tail on fire. "Talk to me, Rodriguez," he called to the sensor operator, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew what the answer was going to be. "Sir, we've got multiple contacts dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system. Configuration unknown, but they're big. Really big. And there are a lot of them." Stone rubbed his temples where a headache was beginning to bloom. "Define a lot. 47 ships, sir. The smallest one is roughly the size of a carrier. The largest—" Rodriguez paused, double-checking his readings. "Sir, the largest is approximately 8 kilometers long." 8 kilometers. Stone repeated the words slowly, as if saying them again might make them less ridiculous. "You're telling me there's a ship out there that's longer than Manhattan?" "Yes, sir. And it's heading our way." Now, most rational species would take one look at 47 alien warships, the smallest of which could probably use Earth's moon for target practice, and immediately start drafting surrender documents. But here's the thing about humans that the Zephyrians hadn't quite grasped yet. Humans have this fascinating psychological quirk, where the worse the odds get, the more belligerently determined they become to prove the universe wrong. It's not intelligence. It's not even particularly rational. It's just pure weapons-grade stubbornness refined through millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of warfare. Sir, Rodriguez was looking at him expectantly. Should I contact Earth Command? Recommend an immediate evacuation protocol. Stone stared out the observation deck at the distant points of light that were rapidly growing larger and more ominous. Any reasonable person would have been reaching for the panic button. Instead, he found himself getting angry. Not scared, angry. Rodriguez, he said slowly, get me a direct line to Admiral Hayes at Fleet Command. Then patch me through to every ship, station, and orbital platform in the system. Sir, and Rodriguez? Wake up everyone in the reserve fleet. Everyone. I don't care if they're in mothballs or scheduled for decommission. If it's got engines and can mount a weapon, I want it ready for combat in 6 hours. Rodriguez stared at him. Sir, with respect, what exactly are we going to do against 47 ships that could probably crack our planet like an egg? Stone grinned, and it wasn't a particularly nice expression. We're going to remind the universe why humans don't have a lot of natural predators. The transmission reached the inevitable conquest approximately 30 minutes later, broadcast on every communication frequency the humans possessed. Kethvar had been expecting the usual response, either immediate surrender or desperate pleas for mercy. What he got instead was different. The human who appeared on the view screen was relatively young for his species, with short brown hair and the kind of expression that suggested he was either very brave or very stupid. Possibly both. Attention alien vessels, the human began, and Kethvar noticed he didn't sound particularly intimidated. This is Lieutenant Commander Alex Stone, representing the United Earth Defense Force. You are currently in violation of Sol System territorial space. You have exactly 1 hour to reverse course and exit our system, or we will consider your presence an act of war. The bridge of the inevitable conquest went silent. Mordax actually dropped his data tablet. Kethvar began, his voice rising in pitch. Did that soft-skinned mammal just threaten us? On the screen, the human continued. Just so we're clear on the math here, you've brought 47 ships into our system without permission or invitation. We've got maybe 30 functional military vessels, most of which are designed for patrol duty and couldn't punch through wet paper. By any rational calculation, you should be able to swat us like flies. Kethvar nodded approvingly. At least the creature understood basic arithmetic. However, Stone continued, and his grin got wider. There's something you should probably know about humans before this goes any further. We have this really unfortunate habit of doing incredibly stupid things when people point weapons at us. It's not strategy, it's not tactics, it's just how we're wired. The human leaned closer to the camera, and Kethvar could see something in his eyes that made the ambassador's mandibles twitch nervously. So here's what's going to happen. In about 5 minutes, we're going to start launching everything we have at you. Missiles, kinetic impactors, nuclear warheads, everything. Now, realistically speaking, most of it probably won't even scratch your paint. But here's the thing. Stone's smile turned genuinely terrifying. We're really, really good at making things explode. And we've had a lot of practice. The transmission ended. Kethvar stared at the blank screen for several long moments. Mordax. Yes, Ambassador? Run a detailed tactical analysis of their weapon systems. I want to know exactly how much damage they can inflict on our fleet. Sir, our preliminary scans already show... Do it again. And this time, I want worst-case scenarios for every weapon system they possess. Include theoretical maximums for their nuclear arsenals. Because here's the thing that was beginning to dawn on Kethvar. In 12,000 cycles of galactic conquest, the Zephyrians had never encountered a species that responded to overwhelming odds with what could only be described as aggressive cheerfulness. The analysis came back 20 minutes later, and Mordax delivered it with the kind of expression usually reserved for funeral directors. Ambassador, our tactical assessment indicates that while their conventional weapons pose no significant threat to our vessels, their nuclear capabilities are... substantial. Define substantial. Sir, they appear to have weaponized nuclear fission and fusion on a scale we didn't anticipate. Conservative estimates suggest they possess enough nuclear firepower to render their own planet uninhabitable several times over. Their own planet? Kethvar's mandibles clicked in confusion. Why would any species develop weapons capable of destroying their own world? Unknown, sir. But there's more. Our deep scans indicate they've been testing these weapons regularly, on their own planet, for approximately 70 of their years. Let that sink in for a moment. The Zephyrians had just discovered that humans had spent the better part of a century perfecting the art of building weapons specifically designed to kill everything on their own planet, and they'd been testing them regularly just to make sure they worked properly. "What kind of species does that, sir?" Mordax continued, consulting his tablet with the enthusiasm of someone reading their own death warrant. "There's something else. Our psychological profile indicates this species has a documented history of fighting wars against impossible odds. They appear to have a cultural preference for what they term last stands." Last stands? Situations where victory is mathematically impossible, but they fight anyway. Often to the death. Sir, their military history is full of examples where small groups of their warriors held off vastly superior forces through sheer bloody-mindedness. Kethvar felt a strange sensation in his primary stomach. It took him a moment to recognize it as anxiety, an emotion he hadn't experienced in approximately 4,000 cycles. "How often do these last stands succeed?" "More often than they should, sir." Stone was having the time of his life, which was probably a good indicator that he'd finally snapped under the pressure. He stood in the command center of Luna Station Alpha, watching the tactical display as every functional human warship in the system moved into attack formation. It was, objectively speaking, one of the most hopeless military situations in recorded history. 47 alien dreadnoughts against 30 human ships, most of which were glorified patrol boats with pretensions. The largest ship in the human fleet was the carrier Intrepid, and it was roughly the size of the aliens' fighter escorts. "Sir," came the voice of Captain Miranda Walsh from the Intrepid. "All ships report ready for combat operations. Though I feel obligated to point out that this is probably the stupidest thing we've ever done as a species." "Probably," Stone agreed cheerfully. "But here's the thing, Walsh. These bastards just showed up in our system and told us to surrender. They want to harvest our oceans and turn us into slaves." "Yes, sir, and they can almost certainly do it." "Maybe, but they're going to have to work for it." The first wave of human attacks began exactly on schedule. A coordinated barrage of nuclear-tipped missiles launched simultaneously from every ship in the fleet. The warheads weren't particularly sophisticated by galactic standards, crude fission and fusion devices that any advanced civilization could probably neutralize without breaking a sweat. The problem was that the humans had launched approximately 300 of them, all at once. On the bridge of the inevitable conquest, alarms began wailing as the tactical display lit up like a Christmas tree. "Ambassador," the tactical officer's voice cracked slightly. "Massive missile launch detected. 400 inbound warheads." 400? Kethvar's voice rose an octave. "How many nuclear weapons do these primitives have?" "Unknown, sir, but they appear to be launching everything they possess." Now here's where things get interesting from a tactical perspective. The Zephyrians had excellent defensive systems. Energy shields that could absorb tremendous amounts of damage, point defense weapons that could intercept incoming missiles, and armor that could withstand most conventional weapons. What they didn't have was experience dealing with opponents who approached warfare with the subtlety of a brick through a window. Most civilized species, when faced with superior firepower, would probe for weaknesses, test defenses, maybe try to negotiate. Humans, apparently, preferred the throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach to military strategy. "Sir!" The tactical officer's voice was climbing toward panic. "Our point defenses are engaging, but there are too many targets. We're intercepting approximately 60% of inbound missiles, but..." The first nuclear warhead detonated against the shields of the inevitable conquest with the approximate subtlety of a supernova having a temper tantrum. The bridge lights flickered, and Kethvar felt the deck plates vibrate beneath his feet. Then the second warhead hit, and the third, and the fourth. By the time the barrage ended, the inevitable conquest shields were down to 30% capacity, and 3 of the smaller Zephyrian vessels had been forced to withdraw for emergency repairs. "Damage report," Kethvar barked. "Shields holding, but barely. Hull integrity maintained, but we've lost approximately 40% of our point defense grid." "Sir," the tactical officer paused. "Sir, they're launching a second wave." Stone watched the tactical display with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for people who'd just won the lottery. The alien ships were still there, still functional, and still probably capable of turning Earth into cosmic dust. But their neat formation had broken apart, and several ships were clearly damaged. "Rodriguez, what's the status on our missile reserves?" 60% depleted, sir. But the good news is we've still got the kinetic impactors. Ah yes, the kinetic impactors. Humanity's contribution to the ancient art of hitting things really, really hard. They were essentially oversized bullets launched at significant fractions of light speed, designed on the principle that if you hit something hard enough and fast enough, it would break regardless of what it was made of. "Launch everything we've got," Stone ordered, "and prep the Prometheus package." Rodriguez went pale. "Sir, the Prometheus package is still experimental." We don't even know if it'll work. Then I guess we're about to find out. The second wave of human attacks was different from the first. Where the missiles had been flashy and explosive, the kinetic impactors were subtle death delivered at relativistic speeds. No warheads, no explosions, just tungsten rods moving fast enough to make Einstein weep. On the Zephyrian flagship, the tactical officer was having what could only be described as a complete nervous breakdown. Ambassador, we have multiple kinetic projectiles inbound. No explosive signatures, but they're moving at... Sweet ancestors, they're moving at 0.27 light speed. That's impossible, Krathos snarled. Primitive species don't have the technology to accelerate mass to those velocities. Tell that to the projectiles, sir. The first impactor struck the heavy cruiser. Relentless fury, approximately 3 seconds later. There was no explosion, no dramatic fireball. Just a tungsten rod the size of a telephone pole punching through 8 feet of advanced armor plating like it was tissue paper. The cruiser's fusion reactors went critical approximately 0.3 seconds later, and the resulting explosion could be seen from Earth's surface. One down, Stone muttered, watching the tactical display. 46 to go. The Zephyrian formation, which had maintained perfect discipline through the nuclear barrage, finally began to show cracks. Ships scattered, seeking evasive maneuvers, but the kinetic impactors were too fast and too numerous. 3 more vessels took critical damage before the barrage ended. Sir, came Captain Walsh's voice over the comm. I'm reading massive energy buildups on the remaining alien vessels. I think they're preparing to return fire. Then I guess it's time for the Prometheus package, Stone said. He turned to Rodriguez. You remember the theoretical studies on solar manipulation? Rodriguez nodded slowly. The ones that said it was theoretically possible but completely insane to actually attempt? Those are the ones. Transmit the activation codes. Now, let's pause here for a moment to discuss the Prometheus package, because it perfectly encapsulates humanity's approach to problem solving. If you can't solve it with conventional weapons, try something so crazy that it circles back around to genius. The Prometheus package was based on a relatively simple principle. The sun is essentially a massive fusion reactor held together by gravity, and like all reactors, it could theoretically be made to run a little hotter if you knew which buttons to push. The buttons, in this case, were a series of gravitational resonance generators hidden in the outer system, designed to create tiny fluctuations in the sun's magnetic field. Tiny fluctuations that, when amplified through stellar dynamics, could cause brief but spectacular increases in solar output. It was the kind of plan that could only be conceived by a species that had spent centuries playing with nuclear fire and somehow managed not to extinct themselves. The activation sequence began with a series of precisely timed gravitational pulses, each one perfectly calibrated to resonate with the sun's natural magnetic field oscillations. The effect was subtle at first, just a slight increase in solar wind, a minor uptick in radiation output. Then the cascade effect began. Solar flares erupted from the sun's surface, directed and focused by the gravitational lenses into a coherent beam of plasma and radiation that would have made a supernova jealous. The beam swept across the inner system like the finger of an angry god, and everything it touched simply ceased to exist. On the bridge of the inevitable conquest, every sensor array simultaneously went into overload. "What is that?" Krathos screamed over the wailing alarms. "Sir, it appears to be their star, sir. They're weaponizing their own star." Let that sink in for a moment. The humans, faced with superior alien technology, had decided their best response was to turn their own sun into a weapon of mass destruction. The solar beam swept through space at the speed of light, and when it struck the Zephyrian fleet, the results were dramatic. Ships that had survived nuclear bombardment and kinetic impactors simply vaporized when they encountered plasma temperatures approaching those found in stellar cores. 17 ships died in the first pass. "Evasive maneuvers!" Krathos bellowed. "All ships, emergency jump to hyperspace." "Sir, we can't. They're jamming our FTL drive somehow." Which was true. The same gravitational resonance generators that were controlling the solar beam were also creating interference patterns that made faster-than-light travel impossible. The humans had essentially turned their own star system into a giant trap. "Sir," Mordax said quietly, "perhaps we should consider negotiating?" Kethvar's mandibles clicked furiously. "Negotiating with primitives? We are the Zephyrian Collective! We do not negotiate with lesser species." "Sir," Mordax replied, gesturing toward the tactical display where another 3 ships had just been reduced to constituent atoms. "I'm not entirely certain they qualify as lesser species anymore." Stone watched the tactical display with the kind of expression usually reserved for people witnessing divine intervention. The Prometheus package was working better than anyone had dared hope. The alien fleet was scattering like leaves before a hurricane, and their numbers were dropping rapidly. "Sir," Rodriguez called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the alien flagship. They want to negotiate." "Do they now?" Stone's grin turned predatory. "Put them through." The holographic display shimmered, and Ambassador Kethvar appeared, though he looked considerably less confident than he had an hour earlier. His chitinous exoskeleton was scored with stress fractures, and his compound eyes were darting nervously around the bridge of his ship. "Human military commander," Kethvar began, and Stone noticed his translator was having trouble with the diplomatic protocols. "The Zephyrian Collective is prepared to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to this conflict." "Really?" Stone leaned back in his chair. "That's funny, because an hour ago you were demanding our surrender and threatening to harvest our oceans. What changed your mind?" Kethvar's mandibles clicked irritably. "Your species has proven to be more resourceful than our initial assessments indicated." "More resourceful." Stone repeated the words slowly. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like we just handed your collective asses to you, using weapons you didn't think we were smart enough to build." "Your tactics are unconventional," Kethvar admitted grudgingly. "Unconventional? We turned our own star into a weapon!" "Most species would consider that completely insane." "Yes," Kethvar said quietly. "Most species would." And there it was, the moment when the Zephyrian Collective finally understood what they were dealing with. Humans weren't just another primitive species to be conquered or enslaved. They were something much more dangerous. A species that would literally set their own solar system on fire, rather than surrender to superior force. "So here's how this is going to work," Stone continued, his voice taking on a conversational tone that somehow managed to be more threatening than screaming. "You're going to take what's left of your fleet and you're going to leave. You're going to go back to wherever you came from. And you're going to tell every other species in your little collective that Sol system is off limits. And if we refuse?" Stone gestured toward the view screen, where the sun was still throwing off solar flares with the enthusiasm of a star having a very bad day. "Then we find out if the Prometheus package has a higher setting." Kethvar stared at him for a long moment. "You would destroy your own solar system?" "Ambassador, we built weapons specifically designed to kill everything on our own planet, and we tested them regularly for 70 years just to make sure they worked." "Do you really want to find out how far we're willing to go to protect what's ours?" The answer, clearly, was no. The remaining Zephyrian ships jumped to hyperspace approximately 10 minutes later, leaving behind only debris and the kind of interstellar incident report that would probably become required reading at military academies across the galaxy. 3 days later, Stone stood in the observation deck of Luna Station Alpha, watching Earth turn slowly in the void below. The crisis was over, the aliens were gone, and humanity had somehow managed to avoid extinction through the time-honored tradition of doing something so completely insane that it actually worked. "Sir?" Rodriguez approached, carrying a data tablet and looking vaguely shell-shocked. "We're getting reports from deep space monitoring stations. It seems word of our little encounter has spread." "Oh?" "Yes, sir. Apparently, the Zephyrian Collective has issued something called a Species Classification Advisory to all member worlds of their Galactic Alliance." "And what does this advisory say?" Rodriguez consulted his tablet. "It classifies humanity as a Category Omega threat, defined as a species possessing technology and tactical doctrines that pose existential risks to galactic stability." Stone raised an eyebrow. "Existential risks?" "Yes, sir. Apparently, the specific citation reads, Species demonstrates willingness to weaponize stellar phenomena and engage in tactical scenarios with unacceptable risk profiles. Recommended response, complete avoidance." "Complete avoidance." Stone nodded thoughtfully. "I can live with that." Over the following months, reports began filtering in from Earth's deep space observation networks. It seemed that the Zephyrian Collective had been quite thorough in spreading the word about humanity's new status as galactic badasses. Trade routes were being rerouted to avoid Sol system. Exploration fleets were giving Earth a wide berth, and several species had apparently designated the entire local stellar group as a hazardous navigation zone, which was fine with humanity. They had enough problems without worrying about alien invasions every few years. But the real proof of humanity's new reputation came 6 months later, when Earth received its first official diplomatic contact from an alien species. The message was brief, formal, and delivered from a respectful distance of several light years. "Greetings to the Terran Defense Forces. The Altarian Republic wishes to establish formal diplomatic relations with your species. We have heard of your recent encounter with the Zephyrian Collective, and wish to assure you that the Altarian Republic has no territorial ambitions in your region of space. We would be honored to exchange ambassadors and establish trade agreements, provided you promise not to weaponize your star during negotiations." Stone had laughed until his sides hurt when he read that last part. The truth was, humanity had never intended to become the galaxy's boogeyman. They'd just been defending their home using the only weapons they had available. But the universe had apparently decided that any species crazy enough to turn their own sun into a weapon was probably too dangerous to mess with. And really, Stone reflected, that was probably for the best. Humans had always been much better at making friends when people weren't pointing guns at them. The Prometheus package was quietly decommissioned after the crisis, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. The gravitational resonance generators were repurposed for deep space research, and the activation codes were locked away in a vault somewhere beneath NORAD. But the knowledge remained, and throughout the galaxy, species that had once considered Earth a potential target for conquest now marked their star charts with a simple notation: Sol system. Approach with extreme caution. Inhabitants may be armed and extremely dangerous. It wasn't exactly the reputation humanity had been aiming for when they first reached for the stars. But as reputations went, Stone had to admit, it could have been worse. After all, it's better to be feared than ignored. And in a galaxy full of species that seemed to think conquest was a reasonable hobby, being feared meant being left alone to explore the universe on their own terms, which was really all humanity had ever wanted in the first place. Epilogue. 10 years later. The Galactic Trade Summit was being held at the neutral space station, Deep Unity, a massive construction project jointly funded by 17 different species who had discovered that peaceful commerce was considerably more profitable than interstellar warfare. Ambassador Sarah Mitchell, Earth's first official representative to the galactic community, stood at the observation deck, watching the parade of alien vessels arriving for the conference. In the 10 years since the Zephyrian incident, as historians were already calling it, humanity had become something of a local celebrity species. Not because they were particularly advanced. Dozens of species had better technology, longer histories, and more impressive civilizations. But because they were the only known species to have successfully told the Zephyrian collective to go jump in a black hole and live to talk about it. "Ambassador Mitchell?" A voice behind her spoke in accented standard. She turned to see Ambassador Kethvar himself, looking considerably more diplomatic than he had during their first encounter. The years had been kind to him, though she noticed he still twitched slightly whenever he saw a human. "Ambassador Kethvar," she replied politely. "How nice to see you again." "Indeed." He paused, mandibles clicking softly. "I wanted to apologize for our initial encounter. The collective's policies regarding first contact have undergone significant revisions since then." "Oh?" "Yes. We have concluded that the traditional approach of conquer first, ask questions later, may have certain drawbacks when applied to species with unconventional defensive strategies." Mitchell smiled. "That's very diplomatic of you." "We are a diplomatic people," Kethvar said, then added quietly, "when we are not being shot at with weaponized stars." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the ships arrive. Finally, Kethvar spoke again. "I'm curious about something, Ambassador. The weapon you used against our fleet, the stellar manipulation device. Do your people still possess this technology?" Mitchell considered her answer carefully. The truth was that the Prometheus package had been decommissioned years ago, its components repurposed for peaceful research. But the galaxy didn't need to know that. "Let's just say that humanity prefers to focus on peaceful applications of our technology these days," she said diplomatically. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what she had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of nervous laughter. "Of course. Peaceful applications. Yes." He paused, then asked the question that had apparently been bothering him for a decade. "Ambassador, may I ask, why did your species develop such extreme defensive measures? Most civilizations focus on conventional military technology." Mitchell thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. "I suppose it's because we've never been particularly conventional. When someone points a weapon at us, we don't think about whether our response is proportional or reasonable. We think about how to make sure they never do it again, even if it means destroying your own solar system." "Ambassador," Mitchell said with a smile, "we're the species that spent centuries building weapons capable of ending our own civilization, just to make sure our enemies couldn't end it first. Self-destructive determination is basically our hat." Kethvar stared at her for a long moment, then made what she had learned was a Zephyrian gesture of respect. "Ambassador Mitchell, I believe I speak for the entire collective when I say that we are very glad you are our friends and not our enemies." The feeling is mutual, Ambassador. And really, that was the whole point. Sometimes the best way to make friends in a hostile galaxy is to convince everyone that fighting you would be more trouble than it's worth. It's not particularly noble or enlightened, but it works. And in the end, that's the most human thing of all. Final note. The universal constant isn't the speed of light or gravity or any of the fundamental forces that hold reality together. The universal constant is that if you push humans hard enough, they will find a way to push back harder than physics should reasonably allow. It's not a bug in human nature, it's a feature, and the galaxy is slowly learning to appreciate the difference.